Jimi Hendrix, Miles Davis and Paul McCartney in a jazz rock supergroup? Way back in 1969, a telegram was sent by Jimi Hendrix and Miles Davis to Paul McCartney. It asked the Beatle if he would be interested in joining them to play bass on some sessions that they planned to record together, along with drummer Tony Williams. Depending on what story you read, McCartney either didn't get the message or was out of town, and sadly those recording sessions never took place. But the inclusion of Paul McCartney in the group, along with Jimmy and Miles, would have assured the project worldwide success. And of course Jimmy loved the Beatles. 4 days after the release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Jimmy was playing the title track in concert. Miles Davis was introduced to Jimmy's music by the British guitarist John McLaughlin. John says the concert movie Monterey Pop was playing in his local cinema, and he took Miles along. When Hendrix made his appearance, all McLaughlin could hear was Miles saying, "Damn, Jimmy, damn." By the late 60s, Miles Davis was listening to blues guitarists like Muddy Waters and B.B. King and trying to get some of that sort of voicing into his music. And at the same time, he was also fascinated by the music of Sly Stone, James Brown and of course Jimi Hendrix. Miles was convinced he had to move away from the jazz of old and into blues, rock and what would come to be known as jazz rock, jazz fusion. At the same time, Jimmy was desperate to break away from being a pop star, playing the hits, all the gimmicks, the party tricks, playing with his teeth, behind his back. He wanted to be taken seriously as a musician, so he jammed with everyone and anyone. He was always humble, always gracious. So what could these two musical geniuses concocted if they had played together? Well, first off, could Jimmy play jazz? I hear that question asked a lot. When it was asked to Jaco Pastorius, Jaco replied, "All I got to say is third stone from the sun." And for anyone who doesn't know about that by now, then you should have checked out Jimmy a lot earlier. You dig? Many writers have noted the jazz influences on the first section of Third Stone from the Sun, notably Mitch Mitchell's Elvin Jones style drumming, Hendrix's guitar echoing John Coltrane, and then Jimmy kind of moves in to some Wes Montgomery style octave guitar melody lines. 2 minutes 30 seconds in, Hendrix abruptly changes direction. With a whammy bar swoop, he leads us into what has been called a psychedelic freak out, but to me it's more akin to free jazz. When Jimmy started to perform the embryonic versions of Third Stone from the Sun with the Blue Flames back at the Café War in 1966, all around him were the jazz clubs and the jazzers with their extended improvisations, and people like Albert Ayler, who was famously quoted as saying, "It's not about notes anymore, it's about the sound." Randy California recalls those early Café War days when the band The Blue Flames would play from 2 p.m. to midnight, 6 sets a night. Jimmy though would often get the band in at midday to rehearse in the Café War's boiler room, and he would show them the new stuff he was writing, which included Third Stone from the Sun. Take a listen also to Little Miss Lover, that dark, irrepressible, funky groove. It could slip easily onto Miles Davis's 1971 album, Jack Johnson. Miles knew this too. This is the way I feel he would have gone. Can you imagine this groove being laid down and then Jimmy and Miles soloing over the top of it? It would be unbelievable. Another example I feel is Rainy Day, Dream Away. Still raining, still dreaming. This for me verges on jazz funk. It opens with some great interplay between Freddie Smith on tenor sax, Mike Finnegan on Hammond organ, Jimmy of course on guitar, and Buddy Miles providing a neat shuffle. As the piece or pieces take off, Jimmy takes flight. But listen to Mike Finnegan's Hammond organ in the background, those bluesy, jazzy runs and fills. Just superb. Now, Miles Davis was a musical avatar. He could see things in musicians that they didn't or couldn't see for themselves. For example, Herbie Hancock, when he played with Miles at one point, got really stuck. He felt he was just playing the same thing over and over again. He couldn't move forward. He couldn't progress. During a gig one time, Miles just leant over to him and said, "Don't play the butter notes." Herbie had no idea what Miles meant. All he could think was butter equals fat equals excess. Herbie says, I figured out what he meant was to leave certain notes out of chords. This wouldn't make the chords really obvious. And when I took a solo, I avoided those obvious notes. And it sounded very erratic. But you know what? I got the biggest applause for that solo. Thinking back on it, I think they felt the purity of what I was doing, the purity of the search. My playing was changed forever by that one phrase of Miles. Drummer Lenny White. Miles was a master at going to listen to musicians and say, okay, I think I could get him to do something that he's not hearing, but he's open enough to hear it. Because I don't know what I want yet, but in him I know I could ask and he'll be able to give it to me. That's what all the musicians who played with Miles, in his groups, everybody said that. Carlos Santana, when asked, what did you learn from Miles? Carlos replied, to be concise, not to play a million notes. Economy. You get precise and concise. You get straight to the heart of it. Miles, I feel, could really see Jimmy's genius and all the possibilities that lay before him. It must have been like discovering another John Coltrane. In Jimmy, here was a guy whose phrasing, attack, power, just pure damn feel was off the scale. And Jimmy had found a way of expressing that sonically and incredibly powerfully. I think that Miles knew that working with Jimmy would incorporate all the finest elements of black music at that time. The funk and the soul of James Brown and Sly and the Family Stone and of course himself. And I can see Tony Williams on drums, but Paul McCartney on bass? Now as a provider of iconic bass lines, counter melodies, and even as he proved with Wings on tracks like Letting Go, Macca can play funk. But if they had veered into jazz fusion territory, I'm not so sure. But saying that, I never put anything past Paul McCartney. For me, the ideal band for Jimmy and Miles, and one that would cover all territories, would have been Jack Cassidy on bass, Stevie Winwood on keyboards, and Ed Cassidy from Spirit. Cassidy had had a long career in jazz, playing for Cannonball Adderley, Jerry Mulligan, and Cassidy One in Spirit covered all musical styles superbly, from jazz, jazz rock, jazz fusion, folk, country, you name it, Spirit played it. So let's drift into what if territory. I think Jimmy could have easily taken John McLaughlin's place in Miles' most obvious nod to rock music, 1971's Jack Johnson. If you've never heard it, Jack Johnson is a neglected gem. Steve Starger, when reviewing the album in the Hartford Courant, called the album magnificent. Another gem in Davis's 20-year string of gems, and wrote that the tracks really make up one long, churning, steaming, brooding, slashing musical experience that never dips below the highest of art. In 1971, Miles said he wanted to put together the best rock and roll band in the world. I guess this was it. Jack Johnson is made up of just two pieces of music. Side 1, Right Off, and Side 2, Yesternow. Right Off contains a riff based on Sly and the Family Stone's Sing a Simple Song, while Yesternow is built around the bass line from James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. So I've always thought that Jack Johnson is the sort of music that Hendrix and Miles would have made together. And you only have to listen to Hendrix's mind-blowing playing on A Band of Gypsies to get a feel of Jimmy's playing with a more soul and funk backing and away from the confines of the experience. Another question is, if Jimmy and Miles had recorded together, where does Bitches Brew fit into all of this? Jazz writer Paul Tanner wrote this about Bitches Brew. Like rock groups, Davis gives the rhythm section a central role in the ensemble's activities. His use of such a large rhythm section offers the soloists wide but active expanses for their solos. He goes on to say, the harmonies used in this recording move very slowly and function modally rather than in a more tonal fashion, typical of mainstream jazz. The static harmonies and rhythm section's collective embellishment create a very open arena for improvisation. The musical result flows from basic rock patterns to hard bop textures, and at times even passages that are more characteristic of free jazz. For me, a Bitches Brew or music like that might have been a step too far for Jimmy back then. New music, learning jazz modes, all the intricacies of jazz, and surrounded by people like the cream of jazz musicians, Wayne Shorter, Joe Zawinul, Chick Corea, Dave Holland. But I think if they'd started with Jack Johnson, the soundscapes that made up a Bitches Brew might well have been something that would have followed. But have a listen to Miles Chase's The Voodoo Down on the album. It's more than a nod to Jimi Hendrix. In the next video, what I'd like to explore is where Jimmy might have gone in the 1970s had he tragically not left us far, far too young. One last point, Randy California, who like I said played with the Blue Flames. I know that he and Jimmy shared a great love of the jazz guitarist Wes Montgomery. When California started his own band Spirit in 1967, the band played a hell of a lot of jazz, and California himself would often play Wes Montgomery style leads, as well as incorporating free jazz and modal jazz on tracks like Ice. So I can't see that Jimmy wouldn't have also slipped quite easily into the genre. So thanks for listening. Please stay safe, stay well. Please like the video, leave a comment in the comment section, and if you haven't, please subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.